I was invited to talk on the High Impact Medicine podcast. Now, the focus of this podcast is to help people from a medical background who are thinking about having high impact careers and trying to have high impact careers. We just finished recording. It was a lot of fun. I shared the path I've taken so far, my main decision points, resources I'd recommend for people starting out with data science and machine learning, and also people who are just thinking about changing careers. You can find more information about high impact medicine on their website, highimpactmedicine.org. Please enjoy the following, which is a conversation with Akhil Bansal from High Impact Medicine.
Hi everyone, and welcome to High Impact Medicine's podcast. In each episode of these series, we talk to a medical professional who is pursuing what they consider to be an impactful career alongside or learning from previous clinical practice. We're going to dive into their journey from med school, the impact of their work, and their advice for anyone interested in going into the same area. Today, we have the privilege of talking to Dr. Chris Lovejoy, who's a data scientist and medical doctor currently based in London. He's passionate about scalable impact through technology and education, and is currently in the early stages of starting his own company, which is backed by Entrepreneur First. He's also a guest lecturer and teaching assistant in machine learning at UCL. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Akhil. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, it's lovely to have you. I think the natural first question to ask is, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey from medical school and how it's led you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I started medical school back in 2011, so just over a decade ago. I studied for 6 years in Cambridge, so the course itself was kind of had a bit of an academic focus, so I was a bit involved in various different academic projects throughout that time, and thought that maybe that was the route I was going to be heading in. Towards the end of medical school, I got quite interested in data science and machine learning, probably around my 5th or 6th year. So I got involved in some projects alongside that as well, and I think published one paper at that time, kind of applying data science to a healthcare related problem. And after that, graduated, started working as a doctor, worked in London for a couple of years. Was really enjoying that, but also kind of felt that I wasn't like fully satisfied by a purely clinical career. So alongside that, I was thinking, what else could I do and what sort of skills could I develop so that I can transition into more of a portfolio type career where I'm doing some clinical medicine, but doing some other work as well. Because of this interest in data science, machine learning, I decided to follow that. Did some different courses and online learning to just level up my skills in that area. And I started working part-time at a startup in London as well called Seracare. And I really enjoyed that. So that kind of gave a bit more momentum, such that then when I finished the second year of working as a doctor, kind of post-medical school, there's a potential natural break in the way that it works in the NHS in the UK, is that you can take a bit of time out of the program at that point. So what I decided to do was take some time out and do a master's degree in data science and machine learning at UCL, just to go kind of much deeper into that, because I've been really enjoying it in my kind of like free time and these little kind of hobby projects I've been involved with. Really enjoyed that. So then started working in technical roles as a data scientist and as a machine learning engineer, just to again kind of level up the skills a bit more, get a bit more industry experience. And again, enjoyed that a lot. Did that for about a year after the master's. And now I have decided to start a company at this kind of interface of data science, machine learning and healthcare. And that's what I'm working on at the moment. And it very much felt like kind of bringing things together. So I got a couple of years of deep data science, machine learning experience. I had the clinical background from studied medicine, worked as a doctor, and then wanted to bring those together and start working on a company. So that's where we are today.
Yeah, super amazing. And thank you for just sharing that journey from start to end. I think it's really nice to hear it kind of from medical school up to where you are now. Let's dive into it and explore some of those steps along the way. So you said in medical school, you know, obviously just getting through your curriculum, and you did a project in data science. And then when you started into medicine, you said you were starting to think more about how clinical medicine maybe wasn't offering everything that you wanted from it. Can you maybe elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. So I think I did enjoy it. Like, I absolutely enjoyed the day-to-day of being a doctor. I enjoyed talking to patients, explaining what was going on, and kind of keeping up to date with everything that's happening on in the ward. But I also did feel a few things. I felt a lack of autonomy. You know, I had just come out of medical school, so I guess I was a fresh graduate, but I was also 24 years old. So it did feel like I was very junior and not really making any kind of decisions or given much responsibility, which I think is less of the case potentially in some other healthcare systems, but in the UK and the NHS, it is very much the case. So it didn't really feel like I was exerting myself, to be honest, which I think I missed. And a second thing, which I didn't realize at the time but realized later, is actually the enjoyment of working on a project over a sustained period of time and kind of gradually chipping away at something. So one thing I've realized I really love and enjoy about data science and working on these kind of problems is that you have one project, you might work on it 3 months, 6 months, sometimes longer, and you'll gradually build up and think about the same thing every day and get a little bit better incrementally until 6 months you can look back and you've made like a lot of progress. Whereas that's quite different in the cadence compared to medicine, because in medicine, it's more like you'll see the patients each day, you'll discharge them, send them home. You might see a patient again that you saw 3 months ago, and then there's a bit of continuity there, but it's not really quite the same. It's not like you're gradually building up a project. You are gradually building up skills, but you're not building up one thing that you're kind of like creating or working on. So that was another thing I felt that I missed. Well, I didn't realize at that moment that was what I missed. So those were some of the thoughts kind of swirling around in my head at that stage.
Did the impact that you could have from clinical medicine factor into your thinking at all, or was it mainly regarding like autonomy and this idea of like building up impact and skill? Yeah,
no, absolutely. Thinking about impact was a big factor as well. I guess actually to add to those 2 points, the third one was really thinking, how can I scale up my impact? So initially I started coming from the point of view of what else can I do alongside my clinical career? Because as is kind of discussed in the effective altruism community, with your clinical career, you see the patients directly in front of you, but you can't really easily scale that because you can only see a certain number of patients in a particular shift. Then the other side of that is that also, for me and like what my kind of skills and interests are, I'm very interested in the data science side of things, the maths, in coding, and that stuff I really, really enjoyed. So I wanted a way to express that. So actually when it came to like stepping out of medicine, probably the two main reasons I would say were, one is pursuing an innate interest and enjoyment in the maths and the coding. And that's an enjoyment I've had since I was young. And then the other side is the desire to scale my impact and try and do things that will mean I can affect more people.
It makes a lot of sense, and it seems like a really good decision like for you, and you picked a really impactful area to work in. I wanna focus in on that time after F2. I know you said that, you know, at the end of F2 it's kind of a natural transition to potentially do something else or explore another option. But it obviously is also somewhat daunting to say, hey, I have this job that is paying me and that has a bunch of respect and is valuable, even though it might not necessarily give me everything that I want. How did you feel taking a step out of clinical medicine? Talk me through your thought process at the time.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I would say is it wasn't so much a cold start of doing F1, F2, and then being like, now what shall I do? Okay, let's go on to do the masters. I'd very much built up to that point by doing lots of kind of small projects that gave me a lot more confidence when going into that decision. And there's a book that I quite like called Little Bets. And the idea is that when you're coming up to making a big decision, you just make little bets on lots of different things, and you just try something small. You don't know what's going to happen with it, but then once you've done that, you can then make the next little bet, and you kind of end up making big bets. Is the idea. So I think for me, taking a full year out of medicine to do a master's was a big bet, but there was lots of little bets before that of trying out different projects, getting involved in a bit of research, working at the startup. That it meant when it came to that decision, I knew I was pretty confident after F2 I wanted to spend some time doing something else. I'd considered various different options, so I had applied for jobs at a few different health tech startups in London, and then ultimately just decided that the master's was probably the best step for me to take. And I think I knew I wanted to try something, and it was the perfect point in that career path. after F2. Just the way that it's set up in the UK with this this year that people commonly do other things in after your second year.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You take smaller bets before taking a bigger bet. And I know that there would probably be a bunch of our listeners who are interested either in data science, machine learning, or in a completely different course area who are thinking about, okay, perhaps I want to try something out. What are small bets that you think someone who is interested, particularly in machine learning and data science, could do to get a flavor for the work and see if it suits them?
Yeah, so I'd say the obvious ones are just doing online courses, learning how to code, and almost certainly learning how to code in Python in terms of language. I think that's very much the starting point, and that anybody who really wants to try things out should do a course in one of those. And there's various good courses online. Andrew Ng has a very, very popular one on Coursera on machine learning that a lot of people tend to do quite early on. And the advice after that would then be find something to get involved in, find some kind of project. Find something that is a smaller version of what you are thinking you might want to do. So if you're thinking about you might want to be a data scientist or work on big health data science projects, find a small project you can do. Find someone who has a data set that you can do some simple analysis on. If you're thinking you might want to apply machine learning to research, find a research group that's using machine learning in some way. Talk to them and see if you can just contribute a little bit to that paper. I'm a big advocate for getting onto actually practical things in the real world. So the courses is like a fundamental. Do some courses, get yourself well versed in the fundamentals, but as soon as possible, get onto actually doing something in the real world. Small projects, nothing that's going to last more than a few months, I would say initially, unless you're really confident. But there are a lot of opportunities. There's definitely increasing number of opportunities out there. And that's what I would say. Absolutely just throw yourself into something, see how it goes. Worst case, you didn't enjoy it, and then you've learned that maybe that's not quite right for you. But that's what I'd say.
And because you haven't invested more than a few months, then it's not a huge loss, right? It's not like you've taken a year or two out. It's only, as you said, a small project that you're kind of doing on the side. So it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so another common thing that I thought about when I was moving into health policy as well was, I think there's this imposter syndrome that you have. Why would I be able to do that? I'd spent 6-7 years studying medicine. That's the thing that I'm good at, and that's probably all I know. I think that's the narrative I think I personally told myself. And from what I learned afterwards is that, hey, actually there's a bunch of skills that I learned in medical school that even though they're not exactly the same, there are some skills that are transferable that have really helped me in my current job. Did you find something similar when you started working more in machine learning?
In terms of whether there were skills from medicine that were helpful?
Yeah,
it's a good question. I guess I do think a lot of what people refer to as soft skills definitely do come in handy, such as being able to communicate things, working in teams. Those are definitely things that are very relevant when you're working as a data scientist. Actually, I think people often underestimate how much of it is about communication, whether that's communication with your team or communication with other stakeholders that you're working for. That's a big part of it. And I did feel confident in my abilities in that area, which I think was honed through working in clinical medicine. And I think working in high pressure situations as well is definitely helpful. I find when you step out of clinical medicine, nothing else seems quite as big a deal, because worst case, you do a presentation, it doesn't go well, but no one's going to die.
No one's dying at the end of the day.
Exactly.
I've said this so many times.
Yeah. So, and I definitely felt that quite acutely. Even on a day where it felt very stressful, I think my stress tolerance is a lot higher, having been in those situations as a doctor. So yes, definitely there's some soft skills that help. I also find, to be honest, that just the reputation of being a doctor also helps.
Yeah.
I think, just that fact, I think for some people will automatically put you in a kind of higher regard, which can be helpful for things like interviews or those kind of settings.
Getting your foot in the door, someone listening to what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And obviously right now you're also working at as you said before, at the intersection between data science and healthcare. Can you give us, for some of the listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with that space, what is that intersection? How big is it? Is it growing?
Yeah, so it's very much a growing area. Since the digitization of a lot of medical information, electronic healthcare records, for example, there are now these increasing sizes of data sets. And because machine learning has advanced quite a lot in the last decade or so, a lot of people are excited about applying those techniques to healthcare. I would say it's still relatively early days, and it's still somewhat niche from the point of view of actual real-world applications. There's a lot of talk about how it could be used, and there are a few cases where companies have built algorithms and they are being deployed. But I think there's a lot further to go, and there are also challenges in the space around actually getting this kind of stuff to work, whether that's from the point of view of data access. There's big challenges around the siloing of health data in different hospitals, and trying to, because with these algorithms, like the more data you have, the better, but often it's hard to like aggregate these into big data sets, because actually healthcare data is really sensitive. So you can't just get 10 hospitals together and put all data in one big pot. You need to kind of go through all these arrangements and agreements and things. So it's an exciting space. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of cool stuff that's being done and a lot of potential. But I think it still feels like we're 5-10 years at least before we're really going to see widespread application, if we do get to that point. So yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. So I guess if that trajectory and that takeoff is in 5 to 10 years' time, do you still think that there's merit in, say, not just doctors, but potentially including doctors getting involved in this space? Do you think there are kind of growing opportunities for them?
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing, especially from when I first started this space maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the number of opportunities available now is huge. Like I think this year the NHS have introduced a role that is a kind of clinical AI role, which I think you do. I think it's 2 or 3 days a week alongside some other kind of clinical training role, and it's like a formal training pathway. So that's a big change from where we were. And there was the Topol review by Eric Topol about 2-3 years back that's then led to these kind of fellowships and different roles people can do in the NHS. I would say I think the main reason why now is actually a fantastic time is because it is early stage, but because there is momentum there. What we do in the next 5-10 years is going to be very, very influential. So the way that we set up guidelines for how AI is going to be used in healthcare, which has been happening in the last couple of years, a lot of big landmark papers outlining guidelines and protocols. Actually, yes, there's a lot of, and also from a kind of high impact career point of view, there's a lot of impact to be had if you can be someone who influences the way in which AI is introduced into healthcare and sets the standards for how it's going to be used going forward. Then that can have a big impact on the future.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Certainly within healthcare and in general, I think there's a massive discussion about setting up systems and governance so that AI is used in appropriate ways that further rather than entrench, like further equality rather than entrench inequality. And I think that that's a really difficult problem to solve, and a bunch of people are really interested in it. So we've talked a little bit about this, but what advice would you give to a medical student or doctor interested in potentially dipping their toes in data science beyond doing some cheap tests? Are there any other things that you would recommend that they could do?
Yeah, I would say a few things. The first, from a practical point of view, is do some online courses, learn how to code in Python, get involved in projects, 100%. The other thing would be reflect a bit on what you want, like why you're considering getting involved in the space, what sort of role you might want to do. Is it that you want to be an academic and you see that machine learning in healthcare is going to be a big area of academia in the future? Is it that you want to work in a startup health tech company? Do you want to work in policy, public health? Like what sort of space do you want to work in? Because that will actually influence the kind of thing that you do and the kind of stuff that you work on quite a bit. And actually a kind of useful facilitating thing to do around that, I would say, is just talk to a lot of people. I did find, particularly in the first year, I made a habit of really just talking to as many people I could working within the kind of wider health tech space, just really understand what's the lay of the land, what sort of opportunities are there, what sort of skills would be valuable, what sort of things can you do as a doctor, what kind of value add can you have, what can you offer. So I think from the point of view of getting up to speed quickly, just talking to people and building out your network is valuable and will also pay dividends down the line. Because a lot of the people I spoke to 5 years ago, I'm still talking to today, and now actually we're having ideas for startups and companies to work together, or he's giving me advice on fundraising, or he's introducing me to somebody else who's giving me useful advice. So definitely worth getting those kind of contacts in and have those conversations.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's been the same in my experience. I think in clinical practice, there isn't as much as a conversation about it, or it's not as important to kind of network and build your connections as much. But I certainly think in other industries, and in fact probably in most, it's really important just to chat to other people, learn about what they're doing, kind of build your network out, because those are the kind of people who are going to not only tell you what's going on in the space, but might make you aware of cool opportunities that you might be able to get involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's a pretty good book called Do You Feel You Wasted All That Training?, which is aimed at doctors who are thinking about kind of transitioning out of full-time clinical medicine. And it has some pretty good advice around networking and talking to people to find out what opportunities are out there. Because it was written by somebody who, I think 10 years ago or more, made the transition from being a doctor into science communications. And they made the point that they only really found out about that through talking to people. So they lay out, in the book, they lay out a framework for networking with people and like having those conversations and gradually honing in on what it is that you want to do as a kind of perimedical occupation.
Yeah, incredible. Hadn't heard of that book before, but certainly sounds like it's exactly the kind of stuff we're talking about at the moment. I'm not sure if you want to, but I think it would be great if you felt comfortable talking a little bit about your YouTube channel and how that is kind of helping bridge the kind of stepping stone that people might want to take in being interested in data science as doctors to actually taking that step and building some of the foundational knowledge.
Yeah, sure. So the way that came about was when I went through this transition of getting into data science machine learning, I felt that there weren't really any resources that were out there that were actually aimed at medics and doctors, because the field was still relatively early, particularly 3-4 years ago when I first started learning this stuff. So I decided that I wanted to just help create educational content to just reduce that barrier. And so I decided to start making YouTube videos. I made a series of about 9 or 10 videos. So initially I was running this in-person course in London around like kind of introduction to machine learning for healthcare, with a particular focus towards people from that kind of healthcare background. Ran that for about a year or so. And then when COVID hit, I decided to turn it into a digital format, record them all as lectures, put them all on YouTube. And then that's been there. And I still get kind of emails from people who watch those videos, go through that course, and then have follow-on questions. So I think it was definitely a good investment of time. It was just one day that I recorded for probably most of the day and then edited it over the course of the next few weeks. And it sounds like people have found that helpful. So I think, that was another thing that's been helpful. And another aspect of what I'm trying to do to scale up my impact as well is just sharing content that can be useful for other people, whether that's direct educational content about data science, machine learning, and healthcare, or even just documenting my journey of what I've been trying to do. And as I try and figure out this sort of dual hybrid path, which is not really like a kind of standardized path yet, to combine healthcare and data science, machine learning in this way. So that's the idea behind the YouTube channel. That's why I'm uploading videos there.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think education, both in terms of knowledge and mentoring, are extremely valuable and super underappreciated as things that can actually have a profound impact on the people who use it. So it was really great to watch your YouTube channel and go on your blog and see how open you were with the resources and how much time you clearly invested in making sure that someone who is interested in that space felt like they could actually learn it and that they could look up to someone who was starting to do that. I think that's really nice. I know this is a very hard question and you're just in the starting stages of your new company, which sounds really exciting. But where do you see yourself in, say, 5 years? Do you see yourself ever practicing clinical medicine, or do you think that you're really happy with working in data science?
So I would love to work clinical medicine again. I haven't worked as a doctor for a while. However, in the best case scenario, I'm hoping that my company that I'm working on now goes very well. And if it does, then probably within the next 5 years, it will be tricky for me to do much time in clinical medicine, because I think that the job itself will be pretty full on. So in terms of where I see myself in 5 years, hopefully with a impactful, international, well-established health tech company. And in a position where I guess maybe at 5 years, I'm starting to think about leaving that company, moving on to the next project. Maybe not. It does depend a little bit on how it evolves. If I am thinking about then leaving that project, then I would definitely be thinking about clinical medicine, maybe going into a clinical training pathway, perhaps doing that part-time and combining it with something else, and looking to set up myself for the future where I'm kind of combining the different jobs to fulfill the different kind of interests and desires that I have from the career that I'm working on, which would be something like 2 days a week, 3 days a week clinical medicine, maybe then working on a different company, maybe the same company, maybe a different company, maybe advising other companies or working in the startup entrepreneur space in some way. And then perhaps, yes, other kind of data science tasks, jobs, maybe research. A mix of things.
Yeah, I guess a lot will depend on how everything goes, but I think it's really, and I think I share this, it's really nice to hear that even if you decide, okay, I want to take a year out or start a company and potentially take 5 or 6 years out from clinical medicine, that there's still the interest and ability to come back to practicing, and that I think that is one of the unique, lovely things about medicine, is that perhaps unlike other areas, that we do have this ability to go back, because I think you clearly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. And just to finish up, if listeners of this podcast wanted to learn more about data science, and I know you've given an incredible amount of advice, what would be your number one must read or must listen, other than your own YouTube channel?
Yeah, great question. I would say actually, yes. One thing I haven't mentioned. So as well as the courses I've mentioned, so there's Andrew Ng's machine learning course, and then there are a few AI for medicine, AI for healthcare courses popping up from kind of Harvard, Stanford, and a few other places, which you can find online. But actually, one resource that I really enjoyed is Deep Medicine by Eric Topol, which is kind of like a popular science book written by Eric Topol, who is a big name within the AI healthcare space. And yeah, I really enjoyed that book. I think it gives a good overview of data science, AI, and how it's being applied to healthcare across different specialities, and extracts a lot of broad themes, and then at the end, it kind of makes a bit of a kind of prediction for the future, or a plead for how we can shape the future of AI in healthcare. So I think that's a great book. And to be honest, Eric Topol's also got a lot of good tweets and information that he shares, and has been on a lot of different podcasts. So anything really by Eric Topol is probably a good introduction.
Sounds like a great place to start. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for taking the time out to chat with us. I'm sure all of our listeners will really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Akhil.